So for our panelists, I'd like to kick off really with, I suppose, a fairly kind of high level overarching question, which is for you to each tell us about a fundamental organizational change that you've seen and experienced that kind of is pretty much like rebuilding that plane in flight, where customer experience has had to remain at the center when pretty much everything is changing. And just give us a little snapshot of that. And what, in your view, was the toughest thing to deal with in that process? What was the thing that was really important to get right in order that such change was possible? And if I may, can I ask you, Stella, to maybe kick us off on that?
Sure, Ben, and thank you, and hi, everybody. And I'm going to do a classic Stella and not give one example
Cool.
to start this off. So for us, I want to talk to three big organisational changes that we have undertaken in the last 3 years, really. So one of them has been the deployment of a new patient administration system, fundamental building block to how a hospital runs and how a health system runs. And I guess one of the most significant areas of focus or learnings from that was about ensuring that you're building for the future and that you understand business process improvement, and that you don't build it just the way that everybody's currently used the 25-year-old system, and just because they like doing it that way doesn't mean that that's the future in terms of using a technology platform. The second one I want to speak to in terms of a significant in-flight organisational change has been the deployment of our Servicenow platform, and in particular how we've used that to engage with all of our employees around their experience of HR, or people and capability as we've called it, and over time building out the various functions that are a part of providing services to staff, our employees who are our customers of that particular platform. And I guess the biggest reflection or learning in that one is the importance of co-design, co-creation, strong engagement with end users, and the buzzwords of, you know, MVP and iterate and go, but really probably the most fundamental part is the co-creation with that end user. And sorry, Russ, to be really greedy. And my third thing I want to highlight, and then you can add to your experience, which is also phenomenally huge, and that is the move for us to a hybrid cloud, public cloud strategy, and in particular what that has meant in terms of transforming quite a traditional IT department into a much more modern IT workplace, and what that's needed to happen in terms of growing capability. And I guess my strongest reflection in that one is the importance of partnership, and that you need to make sure that there's a really strong transfer of knowledge and clear direction of travel around the capability that you want to grow or hire. So those are some of the three kind of themes that have been part of my world for the last 3 years.
Thank you, Stella. That's awesome. And we're going to come back to those and dig a little deeper if we might. Russ,
cool. Thanks, Ben.
What have you seen? And also, you know, for completeness, I want to say, you know, Russ, we know Russ well. Russ is one of our colleagues at Assurity, leading on change with a number of our clients, and he's speaking from a wide perspective of a number of organisations, and in this instance, not on behalf of IR, but we have insight from the inside of that program. So it's awesome to get that.
Cool, thanks, Ben. Yeah, well, I can only reference IR because it is, as you mentioned, one of the most successful large-scale changes the Southern Hemisphere has seen. So I'm going to be not quite as greedy as Stella, but I'm going to go for two for me, because it's quite important to focus on one that went exceptionally well, but also have a reference to one that didn't go so well, because there's equally a lot of learnings you can take from those. Just in terms of inland revenue, just problem statement was, it's a complete business transformation of changing the way that inland revenue provided taxation services for New Zealand public. Making a change at the heart was technology. It was changing the people, the process, the entire operations of IR to deliver a better outcome for New Zealand public. I guess the biggest challenge was probably the sheer size and duration. We're talking $1 billion program of work that went over 7 years, and it's the age-old how do you eat an elephant? Key learnings. For me, it was right at the start having a very clear strategic vision, very, very clearly defined method, and placing the customer at the heart of everything we did in terms of the New Zealand public, the customers of the systems, really placing that at the heart so that every change we made, we went back to how do we reference the customer, increasing the voice of the customer. Other end of the scale was probably, well, not probably, without doubt, changing a payroll for a large ministry that got a little bit of press coverage, and that was really challenging for a number of reasons, but it gave a lot of interest around how a program that sets out with a unclear vision, other than we want to change the software, an unclear way of taking the people on the journey, and also it was some key learnings around choosing a COTS package and then customizing it before implementing. And I guess the biggest challenge that I saw was the relationship with the incumbent provider, and then the relationship with the to-be providers were all culturally misaligned with the ministry.
Thank you. You've both touched on, certainly on co-design and putting the customer at the center. Stella, you made a point of and called out co-design. How easy is it for an organization to move to being much more embedded in, I guess, the day-to-day life of their customers? What have you seen in terms of moving, your organizations, your teams, your colleagues towards being much more firmly embedded in that user research piece and co-design? How do you do that?
Well, we've been on quite a journey for a while in that space. It started with our building facility environment and the establishment from our clinical board about particular principles that needed to be adhered to in terms of the built environment. And one of them was around co-design or consumer participation. And those principles, while they started out from our clinical board being very much about physical infrastructure, they have translated well to other infrastructure, so technology and software infrastructure. And so by having it as a core principle, then you create space for that to occur. And so there's an expectation of engagement with users where they're at, highlighting the vision, to Russ's point, being really clear about where we're going and why we're going and why we need to go in a different direction or a new direction. And then understanding and being clear about you don't necessarily have the map completely marked out, and how might that co-design process help to shape the map of where it is that you go. And some of that's about also building capability for people to free their mind. And so the design lab, which is a physical space, was an important part initially of getting people to be outside their current environment and to think differently, and to be exposed to different ways of doing things. And then when it came to then how that translated into some of the technology platforms that I've talked about, people, one, were comfortable with this as an engagement process. Two, started to expect that this would be the way that things occurred. And certainly with the Servicenow deployment, the level of engagement across the organisation from our staff, and when we asked them what they wanted, lots of them contributed to responding to that. So high engagement, and then an expectation that now that you've asked us, how is it that you'll show that back to us in terms of that that cycle? So I think you have to invest in it. I think you need to protect it. It was a core strategy from the executive, supported, as I said, by the principals from the clinical board. And our internal vision in terms of the Canterbury health system has got the person at the centre.
Yeah.
And so while we started with the patient being at the centre of everything we do, we also added how we have our staff. So there's those clinical people who need to care for the patients, who are at the heart of everything we do. And then there are the people who support the clinicians to deliver the care to the patient. So keeping everybody connected about your role in the delivery of our service and our vision has been really important part of the change process.
Okay, thank you. And I think that also takes me now in my mind to thinking about how leadership needs to be approached in a consistent and maybe different way when an organization, or indeed a whole system in the case of health, is getting much, much closer to really working with its customers. And so maybe we come back to leadership as a separate thing in a moment. Russ, in terms of co-design, I mean, you know, I'm aware that when the Inland Revenue business transformation kicked off in the market and indeed in the sort of I guess the sector and IT press, there was a view that it was mostly about technology, and that I think persisted for quite a long time. And I'm aware that there was something that leadership at IR were keen to, you know, pay attention to and understand that, yeah, technology is a huge part of that change, but the change is done for a reason, and that's to do with humans. So what did you see in terms of IR, in terms of, I guess, ways that management, leadership and teams needed to be organised in order that customers' needs were really kept front and centre?
So I guess there were a couple of key things, and one thing I would say is right at the heart of the transformation, we really had a focus on no impact to external people. So we didn't want to change, and we didn't want to impact our external people. We had clear identification of our customer ecosystem, which quite often in the case of Inland Revenue was sometimes there were three layers between the end New Zealand public. So you had tax agents, software providers. So it was understanding the customer impact map, but then also internally, and this is a large focus right at the start, was understanding the cultural impact of the internal customers and staff at IR. The program really took time to understand and provide a change program that supported the internal people, provide a structure around the internal teams that enabled them to see the vision and achieve it for New Zealand public. So there were a few layers and levels of change programs which were focusing on customer right at the heart of it, but just keeping a focus on, as you say, technology was a large part. It was at the core, but the people were the most important thing.
Okay, cool. So maybe just now come round to the leadership question that we touched on briefly. Stella, what do you feel has been one of the most important qualities of the leaders that I suppose you are surrounded by, and indeed, you know, just reflecting for yourself as well? What are the areas that in these times where digital enables us to have a different kind of relationship with our customers? I'll just call them customers for a minute, just as a broad thing. And in there, maybe let's think about staff being customers of us as well. What are the qualities of a leader that you can see are kind of really critical right now in order that they can best lead and I suppose be supportive and yet focused on delivering the change? Because I mean, there's this real tension often I see where the change is scary and big, and everybody goes, "Oh, it's scary and big. How can we mitigate it through planning?" And sometimes maybe not deliver quite the value that the change was intended to deliver. So what are the characteristics do you think, I suppose, you see in leadership being required now, and reflecting on it yourself, I guess?
So I think to be clear about what's required in a digital world is different from what's required in an analog world. And one of the important part of our leadership is to be really clear about your true north and have some tenacity about where it is that you're going and why you're going there. Because in my environment, and like many on the call, you know, we are at the mercy of policy or structural change or cost reduction or complexities that are part of New Zealand public sector, both local and central government, and that is not quite the same in the private sector, although there's different kinds of constraints in that. So first and foremost is having an understanding about the true north and the vision and the why, and it is important to be able to articulate that clearly, communicate it to everyone. So the NASA moment in terms of everybody knows that we're putting the man on the moon. So everybody understands that Agnes is at the heart of our health system, and how is it that we are asking the question, how are we making it better for Agnes, who is the patient in the visual at the moment for us in terms of the Canterbury health system. And then I think importantly for this audience is understanding the digital leadership requirements, and that's agility, creativity, being okay in the need to take large leaps in directions that we might not have done traditionally. So while there's the agile software development, there's the agility in thinking that's required. There's the ability to need to understand constraints and pivot, but still hold true to the direction of travel. And the other is to create a sense of energy and momentum. And I certainly, that's my thing I talk about with my team all the time. How are we maintaining momentum? Right. So it's hard, sure, and it feels like you've climbed the first mountain and oh my God, there's the next mountain. But being clear about you've achieved good milestones, but you need to maintain that momentum, that energy to progress. So those are some of my thoughts around leadership.
Thank you. That's awesome. And I like the way that you positioned that in terms of the fact that there are different requirements in the digital world than the analog. And in many ways, digital is an opportunity as well as a challenge and a threat, obviously, to every single organization, no matter how mature they are in their digital vision and execution. Hey, look, Russ, I'm aware also there's a thread here, which is, the word innovation came up. We're talking about digital. A large part of what I'm aware IR were trying to do was to understand their place as a brand in the system of tax, and what part of the system of tax and the processes around that they do and other people facilitate and do. So that digital border and the partnerships piece was really, really key. And I know you were across that. So is there anything specific around, I guess, innovation, risk-taking, around that digital border there that you'd like to focus on?
Yeah, I'd probably just echo a couple of Stella's words, because there was an environment, just back to the leadership, that enabled us. So we had a very bold and strong and decisive leadership team, clear governance and forums, and that enabled a platform to innovate for us. Traditionally at IR, when we have exposed APIs or interaction with the website, we would be challenged as to how we increase the voice of the customer, specifically in the API world. Traditionally, it would take 4 to 6 weeks of integration and testing to onboard someone to an API, and that had to be repeated for every subsequent engagement. There was a platform that was developed in the transformation that really focused on the return on investment and enabled us at the digital portfolio to build a set of tech that enabled us to provide self-service testing to our partners. That enabled them to decouple the delivery. It was always quite tightly coupled. Both partners would develop in isolation, come together, take 2 weeks to resolve firewall issues, then start to test and find that the design didn't quite do what we wanted. We focused on a contract testing approach, built our tech at the border, enabled our partners to develop to that contract and test to that contract autonomously, in isolation from IR, while we did the same test to the same contract. And then ultimately we moved that to the cloud, which was just the ability to then provide quality assurance at velocity in the cloud. And again, future-proofing an enduring asset that, as more and more consumers of the API came on board, they were able to test autonomously and only come to IR when they were absolutely ready to progress to production. Significantly reducing time and cost.
Yeah, so cost. I'm interested in if there are any patterns here that you both see in terms of ways to address the cost of change. So I think for some organizations, whilst they know that there's an imperative to change and they have a business case and an investment behind change, there's often a historic backdrop, which is that they know change is expensive, change is risky. Are there any approaches to, I guess, understanding and reducing the cost of change that that you've seen in your work or in your organizations that might be worth unpacking? And I don't know, Stella, if there isn't, that's fine, but that's to you first.
Sure. Sorry, I have to wave. My lights have gone out. I've been sitting still. Look, the one thing in healthcare is change is constant, but that doesn't mean that people like it. And certainly in traditional IT investments, there's this big implementation change management process. So one of the ways we've learnt from previous experiences, one, that co-design process, because actually you get the design of the technology, people and process part of the program up front a little bit more clearly. Mm-hmm. The other, in terms of building out your investment logic and your business benefits realization and your business case, for us has been around bringing in capability. So what we have done now is contracted people to transfer knowledge as part of ensuring that we have a really cost-effective delivery mechanism. And so in both our Servicenow deployment and in our cloud engineering and cloud migration process, we have had external parties with immense capability contracted with us to be 2 in the box or 3 in the box, with the view that they're transferring knowledge. And so that first phase investment is there, and reducing the cost of that investment needing to be for the term of the deployment, but they're there for a period of time. They get us to a level we can run it ourselves, and that reduces the impact on an implementation cost. So that's what we've experienced as a way of reducing the need to cost the change.
Gotcha. Okay. And in many ways that sounds also like, and I'm just making an assumption here, your organization understands that to own and operate services, you need an internal capability that will own and operate the service rather than a partner doing it on your behalf.
Correct. And we also can't fire everybody who's in the current role and employ a whole bunch, and we are needing to think about how we build and grow that capability. So absolutely we'll hire as required, but we've also grown in significant investment in our people to be able to operate the systems.
And Stella, still with you just for a moment, on the partners you've worked with, what's your view in terms of, I guess, readiness of the private sector to partner in that way with you? Did you find that there was quite a high level of maturity in terms of service providers that wanted to work with you and understood it was about capability transfer as well?
It's a bit of a mixed bag. So there are those who are quite mature and understand the importance of building capability, and that makes them sticky. There are others that still think sticky means I get to hold on to my capability and expertise, and you'll need to come back to me each time. Okay,
good. Thank you. Nicely put. Russ, is this a topic that you saw at all around your work at IR and IR's approach, I suppose, to engaging the market and getting external help?
Yeah, so when I look at the cost to change, and just going back a little bit to that question, right at the heart of the change at IR was the recognition that not change was going to be risky and very expensive, and that was the whole point. We'd hit a monolithic heritage system that couldn't change quickly, and therefore it was impacting our ability to provide services effectively to New Zealand. So it's a real theme that we got through in terms of partnering with key delivery providers who could help us innovate, provide a platform for reducing the cost to change now, but enduringly making sure that the cost to change, I referenced how we move that services to the cloud, which was all around basically providing an on-demand service rather than an asset that sat on the infrastructure at IR and continually ran. We're in a position now where that service could be called on demand. It can be shut down and not paid for when it's not required. So that was a key area for reducing costs. And also looking at some other techniques of how we actually reduce the cost of change. Quite often you end up going down a path of delivery, designing a system, providing that system change all through the internal processes, only to find out when you go out to a wider market and the different demographics in the New Zealand public, for example, it doesn't resonate with all people. So Inland Revenue took a very customer-centric approach of actually providing a beta system and going out with very targeted customer interaction testing. So focusing on market segments of people, whether it be tax agents or actually New Zealand public people, who would actually be asked to log on to the beta system, the 2B system, and actually use it as they would do in their day job or feeding back, and actually provide back really key and valuable information right back up to the top level. And it touched on some of the softer things, but really important, like accessibility testing, as well as can I realise the pay my taxes or actually reimburse people for money. Cool.
Okay, cool. Listen, I've got a few other things that I'd like to throw into the mix as questions, but I'm also keen to open it out to people on the call now. And Kaz, have we got any inbound additional questions that we could put to our panelists, or indeed, do you want to?
No, I haven't received anything on the chat. So if there's anyone who's keen to ask questions, just feel free to unmute yourself.
Absolutely.
So that we can continue to keep this interactive.
Otherwise, I'll keep asking questions. Okay, I'll ask a question. I'm aware that with change programs, there's various frameworks and approaches to change, and ways to, I suppose, approach it. There's lots of language around it. People talk about, big bang transformations. People talk about thin slice transformations. People don't talk about transformation. There's a range of different ways of using the language. I guess what I would value is, I suppose, your insights, both of you, on approaches to the organization and the culture that you've seen to be effective when, let's face it, when you're rebuilding the plane, and for which I apologize for the metaphor, it can only take us so far. I mean, who's to say we need a plane? We might need 3 air balloons. But the point is that, I've seen these so-called kind of bimodal changes, which I think was a Gartner term, where you have the new and the old. We've seen people focus on individual small parts of an organization or try and do a vertical stripe through as a thin slice to then promote that change more broadly. Stella, I'd be interested in your view. What approaches to that type of culture and indeed structural change have you seen to work well in that whole land of different approaches?
I think that's the point, is that you need a toolkit of change methodology and frameworks, particularly in large-scale organisations. So we would talk about transformation at a board or executive or ministry level. And we would only speak to transformation with end users as part of looking back and celebrating the transformation. We certainly wouldn't signal there's a big transformation coming up, because that tends to scare people, because nobody really likes the idea that things are going to fundamentally change the way I do things. So I then think you need to approach your strategy depending on the scale of the change and how it connects to the broader vision. And so there'll be times where your point around thin slice, MVP and scale, that'll work for innovation or at the edge change. that you're really just wanting to test and then see how that will work. And sometimes that's important to have that element in your wheelhouse, because not everybody's an innovator. And so how is it that you can work with those that embrace new things and champion that, and then think about how that can scale? And then there's, you know, the standard cotters and all the other change frameworks that are about, well, is it, you know, is it a multi-year program of improvement? Is it a this is how we, is it a continuous cycle of improvement? Or is it like Russell was saying, in terms of, you know, burning platform, old tech must change, so therefore it's a different engagement. So from my perspective, and I, you know, I get teased about it in terms of people say, where's your change manager? And I go, yeah, I don't have a change manager, but I build in change depending on the scale of the program. Hopefully that was helpful.
It was helpful. It was helpful. And just personally, so I'm always slightly itchy about the idea of there being a change manager. Because change, managing it is sort of a separate thing from leading it or following it in a healthy way. But anyway, that's great. Thank you. Russ, I mean, you know, IR was absolutely and still is a business transformation, albeit with the burning platform, if you like, or the need to re-platform. How would you characterize the way that change was approached there as an organization?
Well, we did have I guess a bimodal approach in terms of we were set up structurally around heritage and transformation teams, but underpinning that right at the start was a real, I guess, focus on, we were doing a vision for New Zealand Public, and all the people at Inland Revenue are extremely passionate about providing better taxation services for New Zealand. So it was really much creating that vision around the people that help them change. And then to be honest, it was about simplification. We split the program down into distinct releases. We simplified what we were trying to achieve on each release. We grew and we weren't afraid to adapt. We had a strong structure behind us, strong framework and governance. And that enabled us to focus on some of the challenges from a business and technical level for transforming, that were based around coexistence of two systems. And then actually just supporting the people went through. So people was really, really important to IR. I mean, the people provide the taxation systems. The people at IR understand tax like no one else. It was about providing the right level of support around that to help them. I guess the Albert Einstein quote, if you need different thinking to solve problems than the thinking used to create them. Well, it was about enabling people to have different techniques, training, support, to enable those really, really key people with great taxation knowledge to look at problems in different ways, to support the vision of how we're going to make this better, faster for New Zealand Public. And people went on the journey. Not everyone. I think that's, you know, I think Stella kind of referenced it. There are some people that can't change, and that's okay too. There's always roles for these people, or there's other avenues in life they'll choose. But ultimately, we have to provide a better service for New Zealand Public.
And that's that kind of rallying cry, that kind of vision and thing that binds people together to want to go through what is uncertainty and therefore an emotional and sometimes sort of physical load that they have to carry right through that change in their roles. I mean, we had one question come in, which was, you know, what does building change into each program look like as opposed to having a change lead? And I think in some ways you're both exploring that at the moment. Is there anything specific you would say to that question? So I'll repeat it, which was, what does building change into each program look like as opposed to having a change lead?
So I would echo Russ's point around there being good structures and governance processes, so change advisory boards or change, so that it doesn't matter what part of the organisation or what part of the portfolio or program is connected to the vision, that there's a mechanism to understand. And in a large organisation like ours, we've got change going on everywhere, and sometimes you don't know the impact of your change on their change. And so having some good structures and processes for governance and change advice, advisory boards or change control processes ensures that you building in the structural change without having to have a change lead.
And I think also, Stella, you said it right at the beginning, really, which was, you know, in your world, in the organizations that you're involved with, change is always a constant. And that's just a reality for every organization anyway, right? It's just that when it's service to public, often it's way more evident, and particularly in a political climate where there'll be rhythms to the political and regulatory changes.
And the heightened expectation of our citizens.
Absolutely.
So citizens expect certain things from their health system, and they expect certain things from their tax system.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. So another one just come in. I think this is probably, I'll pass this to you, Russ, to begin with, to have a go at. For long-term transformation projects, it'd be interesting to understand what were the key strategic goals, how did the team alignment to those over the years kind of function, how did that work, and how was it measured over time to show that value was being delivered in that big long-term project?
So I'll probably go back
to answer us, a simple question.
Simple question, yeah, thanks. I'll go back to, and I might need to get you to repeat some of that question because I can't see it at the moment. If I go back to the vision, we had a clear vision statement of what we were trying to achieve, and it was very simple. So for us on a long transformation journey, it was really right at the top and foremost of all of the steering committee, the commissioner, the deputy commissioner. They knew what they were trying to achieve. They were bold and decisive. And then they enabled that change program to roll through the program. So we chunked the program down into specific releases, each with a very clearly defined goal and how we were going to deliver the services to New Zealand public. And it's keeping that change front and foremost of each delivery, and as we progress through it, we continually measured the benefit to New Zealand. There's some little events, but the one that, because it's so topical, just enabling the way we changed the taxation system at in New Zealand enable us to react within weeks to the COVID changes. Now that was something that just wouldn't have been possible in the old world. That's a distinct measurement, but ongoing, the program continually assessed their spend. They were continually control of their spend and their benefits that they were realizing, and continually providing that information back to the stakeholders, i.e. Parliament, on how are we progressing, how are we realizing benefit. And it just continued to keep everyone in a position of informed, we're spending the government's money correctly, and back to, as Stella said, the change forums actually continually measure, help you solve the problems, but also make sure we're aligned with the bigger vision.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Listen, I'm going to now ask you another one, Russ, and Stella, you're very welcome as well. I think, however, it builds on something that Russ has just been unpacking. On the technology side, this question we have here, which is how it's sometimes, well, an observation, it's sometimes really hard to convince the executives in an organization to invest in some of the enabling technology work. And in this case, some of the DevOps platform work has been called out specifically by our participant. There's often a focus on building features without investing in things like specifically test automation and other platform items. How do you sufficiently influence the executive decision makers in a change program to balance funds towards these less visible activities in a transformation?
So you do need I guess you do need a coach or a sponsor of change to promote that innovation. But I think the key message I would give anyone is start small. Look for minimum viable product. We didn't go for a mass, we are DevOps. What we did was actually start and use some practices of DevOps. So when we started to look at building automation assets at the border, we actually built enduring assets that could be used in any environment. And then we progressed it through to using it in production. So we actually built took the ethos of DevOps and actually took those harnesses to actually measuring the customer experience in production. And the value it gave us with the executive and how it developed that real snowball effect of actually this is really cool was being in a position where we were able to tell the executive when their customer experience on their website or in consuming their APIs was degrading over time. And we could actually point back 2 weeks to show them where it started to degrade and actually give them an ability to solve problems. Traditionally, the only time that the executive understood there was a problem with their services was when it hit the news, or unless it was the big bang event, which quite often doesn't happen. It's a deterioration over time. So that was the sort of how you build it: minimum viable product, start small, show benefit, and allow the executive to really understand, hey, here's a solution that gives me that strength of customer feedback instantaneously.
Okay. All right, thank you. So I think we've probably got time for just one more dive in with a question. Stella, if I could just come back to you to round this off. I guess we've been talking about experiences, what we've seen, approaches that have been taken. In terms of the change programs that you've either been involved with or overseen, is there any pattern to the things or the thing that you would do differently? Any real kind of core area that, because I just talk for myself here for a moment, I seem to keep learning some of the same lessons over again, despite my best efforts. So is there anything that you've seen that you would do differently in approaching some of these transformational plane and flight situations?
I'll do a very personal reflection. I love change. I'm a change junkie. I like to drive change. And what I continually need to learn is not everybody's in the same camp as me. And I need to think about understanding time. Now, that doesn't mean that we won't change until everybody's on board. But I know I've got a staff member on board, I set aggressive timelines. And sometimes that works and sometimes that fails because you just haven't brought everybody with you and you've got a bumbling process. And actually, if you have a bad outcome, even if it's an MVP because you've pushed too hard, your ability to recover from that takes 3 times as long than if you've just taken a moment and gone, I'll take another few weeks or to get this process right. And so that's a very personal reflection. That's my personality. It's a constant lesson I am learning. And I think I'm getting there, but I still seem to set pretty stretchy timelines.
Thank you. That's awesome. Awesome that you shared that. Thank you. Russ, what about yourself and what you see?
Probably
done differently in order to get better?
No, I would probably go to some of the ones that have gone wrong for what I would do differently, or I would like to see done differently by the program. Probably a couple of key ones, and I think understanding people, as Stella pointed out, is really important. But making sure you're culturally aligned with your delivery partners. You need delivery partners for change, whether it's software vendors, whether it's support staff. Make sure you're culturally aligned, because I've seen that go very, very badly where incumbent delivery partners weren't culturally aligned with the purchaser of the services. Equally, don't buy a POTS package, get it into production real fast and realize benefit. Don't customize the hell out of it. So be really clear about the change you're undertaking. Those are probably two of the key messages that I would leave you with. Thanks,
that's awesome as well. And I guess I've got time for a sneaky extra question now. And then I think we'll wrap up, because I think everybody probably needs to get a coffee or finish eating their sandwich or whatever they've got sitting on the desk. So Stella, you talked about capability transfer and kind of having that sort of that approach where it's just understood that you want that sort of transfer from the supplier rather than skill hoarding with the supplier. Are there any tricks to how you pulled that off? Any secret sauce?
It's contracted. So I think I'd reinforce Russ's point in terms of, if you're going to do that, you need to be culturally aligned. In terms of choosing that partner, and then it's about contracting, and I mean, a contract is as good as a piece of paper, but in terms of the partnership approach, be really clear about expectation. And certainly for several of our processes, you know, we've had to revisit how we're doing. You know, how's the capability going? How much more investment do I need to be doing? How much more time needs to be released in order for people to get their heads around it? How many more lunches and learns do we need to put in place here? So I started with the contract, but then to Russell's point, into that cultural alignment, that partnership, that knowledge transfer. Yeah, and I'm really proud of the capability that Canterbury and West Coast District Health has now in terms of the platforms that we can deliver.
Awesome, thank you. And listen, thank you to both of you for giving so generously of your time and your experiences and being so open. It's fantastic. This area of how we support organisations to go through fundamental change, whilst understanding those organisations are made up of humans, and that there's humans for which we're in business or funded by government in the case of the public sector to deliver services, and how we keep that in right at the heart of the change as we're going through is kind of the nub of an awful lot of what our sector is focused on and the problems we're trying to solve every day in every organisation. So it's a conversation we should keep having. This is the first of a number of opportunities to do that. What we're going to do is we're going to take the transcript from this, some of the key themes and so on. We'll share it with our panelists. We'll make sure we're comfortable sharing it more widely. Then we'll share it with everybody who's been on the call. It might well lead to us thinking we want to have a deeper dive on one aspect of this, because we've been very high level, which is cool. And, you know, to those on the call, we'd welcome you sharing the fact that this was hopefully a worthwhile experience for you. We hope you got something from it. Keep watching. We hope to do more. And we certainly will be making the output from this available for people to take away. So thank you so much. And we'll see you again.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, Stella. Thanks, Russ and Ben. Thanks.